Hey team, welcome back to the show. Today it is Coach Andrea and I talking through our own fat loss phases and wanted to kind of just have an open conversation around what we've been up to with our fat loss phases, biggest challenges, things of this or aspects of this that are most difficult for us and kind of how we've gone about working through them. So it'll be a fun topic to get into. We also put out a Q&A box for our clients and on Instagram. So good amount of questions here. Just any questions y'all have for us as far as what our personal fat loss phases have looked like. So I'm excited to get into that. I don't know. Do you have any personal updates that aren't related to fat loss? I feel like most of our updates are probably related to this. I don't know if it makes as much sense for us to do updates here. Anything else that you want to talk about?
I'm just so used to updating on the fat loss phase and like what we're doing in training and with my diet at the moment. So we're gonna get into all that.
Okay, so neither of us really have any life outside of this, so thus there's nothing else to report on. So let's just hop right in. Can you give us an overview of what your fat loss phases looked like? Kind of what your macros have looked like, your total loss, your timeline, your cardio, basically just what you've been up to. I think this will be really good context for the listeners then when we go in and answer these questions.
Yeah. So I did a build phase for about a year, maybe a little bit over a year. Um, in September, we went into health phase, which is essentially just getting started with the the fat loss phase, bringing food volume down and just getting the scale trending downward before we're actually calling it a fat loss phase. um, so, I mean, that was September. So I've been basically in it since that point, although my food was still pretty high. Like I was still at 2000, 2100 calories per day. I officially started the fat loss phase in the beginning of November. So the highest my weight got on average was 167. I got to 169 one time on the scale. So I almost hit 170, which is
Were you intentionally pushing
crazy.
for that number?
I yeah, I had
Hilarious.
accidentally dumped, so I put a little bit of salt in like a smoothie that I make, and I accidentally used like the wrong side of the salt thing and dumped it, and I tried to get as much out as I could, and I'm like, I'm not remaking this. And my weight was up quite a bit the next day. I hit 169. But anyway, that's not important to this. I started in November in the fat loss phase. My calories were about 1900 per day on average. Um they've just kind of, how fat loss phases go. We wait until things are kind of stalling and we drop them again. So there's been a couple of different targets since that point, but right now on average I am at 1550. Um Off days are a little lower, training days are a little bit higher. It feels really manageable still. Like honestly feeling pretty easy. And we started out with 2 cardio days per week at I think 250 calories each, and now I'm at 5 cardio sessions per week at 300 calories each.
Okay. How long does that take you to do?
About 30 to 35 minutes.
I was gonna say that sounds. I'm normally at like 30 minutes and I'm at like 400 ish,
And I
which
was
is
telling you,
estimated.
it's hard for me to get my heart rate up on the bike because like my legs are tired, and I've heard
Oh
other people
yeah,
say this too.
yeah.
I'm thinking about getting an elliptical
I was gonna say the
because
bike would suck for that.
yeah, especially after a leg day.
Hmm.
So yeah, I've been looking at ellipticals. I might go get one here pretty soon because that's gonna help me. That's gonna help me in my leg days. And also, I know that there's a contest prep coming for me at some point, and when I'm doing even more cardio, I don't want to be just banging my legs up every single day. So
You don't like just like an incline treadmill. You like an elliptical better.
yeah,
Really? I feel like the
yeah,
incline treadmill, you can just put the incline like at like a nine. It's so easy to get your heart rate up. I
yeah.
feel
I
like
don't
that's
know. I
easier
really
than the
like the
elliptical.
elliptical. It's super easy on my legs, and I can just feels like I just sit there and spin, but my heart rate is up nice and high, and I
I've
like it.
honestly just never done the elliptical. I always just feel dumb on it. The
Yeah,
moment. But okay. All right. So basically doing 5 days a week cardio, 300 calories per session. You're around 1550 calories on average, you said.
Hmm. Oh, I
How
guess I should
much?
also say my weight right now. This morning I was at 146.5.
So we're 13 pounds down.
20,
No, sorry,
21.
terrible math. Okay, thank you. And how long have you been dieting total?
Well, that high weight was at the start of the health phase. So with that, that's 24 weeks so far. From the official start of the fat loss phase, that's been 14 weeks.
Okay, so somewhere between 14 and 24 weeks.
And so we're
But
between 13 and 21 pounds.
realistically, it sounds like you've been dieting for closer to that 24 weeks. Just the health phase
Mm,
wasn't necessarily framed as like a fat loss phase, but you were losing body fat in that phase, correct?
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, cool. Anything else on yours?
No?
All right, so on my end, I have just been doing a quicker cut, which I think will ultimately end up being like right at 8 weeks. We are going to Portugal, which why I'm cutting for that, I'm honestly not sure because it's gonna be like I think a little bit colder than it is here there at this time of year. I think it'll be like 70s. Probably not gonna be like anything where I'm even shirtless, but it's all good. Either way, I wanted to kind of clean things up, get a little bit leaner, see where we're at. So I mean, I'm 5.5 weeks in now. I started at 230. I was like sitting in anywhere between 235 and 233, like the week or two prior. My official weight, like the day that I started, was like 232.8. The lowest I have seen is actually 216. But that was like I was super depleted. I was like sick. I had to like take time off of training. So I don't think that's really accurate. Um, so basically how this has gone along, first 4 weeks, I was only doing two cardio sessions a week, 20 minutes. Heart rate right around 140 to 150 beats per minute. And then calories were at 2100 to 2200 daily. So in there also we had talked through like getting sick and whatnot. Everyone was sick. That and I feel like so many clients have in the last like week or two. I've had so many
Mm-hmm.
clients who are sick also, and it's like, oh, dude, I'm sorry. It sounds like you have what I had, but um, basically, first 4 weeks dropped really, really quickly. Um, Again, I dropped like 16, 17 pounds in the first 4 weeks. I think realistically, again, it was more like probably 12-ish
Mm-hmm.
pounds. Then this last week, so basically last 10 days, things have changed quite a lot in the approach, and training performance was really starting to suffer there. Because my food was pretty low, and even that was with we were still using like a couple of refeeds per week after the first. Well, the last 2 weeks of that we used like a couple of refeed days, but still like things were just dropping really quickly. Training performance was suffering. So I'm training 5 days a week, upper lower, push pull lower. Um, Delts, arms are a little bit more of a priority there. And we are on training days. Now the approach is on training days, I'm aiming to eat around 2,700 calories. On my two rest days, I am around 2,200 calories. But also cardio's come up a lot. So it's come up from 2 days a week to 5 days a week. So I'm now doing 5 days a week, 25 minutes per session. My heart rate right around 135 beats per minute, which for me isn't hard to get to really. I mean, it takes like a minute or two of like going at a good clip, and then I'm typically like having to slow it down like over time to like keep my heart rate from going too high. But I also think I take a lot more stimulants than you, so that probably helps me out. Um, but yeah, and weight has stayed right around like 221 pretty consistently, so a little bit higher. Visually though, I look better. My waist measurement has dropped. So what I'm at, I was at like 32.75 around my navel as of what was that, Tuesday morning. And I think it was up to like 30, I think it was in like the 35s at the end of my build phase. Um, yeah, 34.75. Oh no, 34.25. So, but even from like a couple weeks ago to now, my waist measurement had dropped. And visually, I'm looking better. I think that weight not moving more is two part. First, I am eating more carbs. My training feels so much better. My training's felt incredible actually for like the last week and a half. But again, after especially after like the time away from being sick, I was just like very depleted, very flat. So again, I don't think
Mm-hmm.
like all that. I don't think that was actual like weight loss. It was more like just me being very depleted. So I'm not surprised, but like visually, I look a lot leaner. Things are looking better. I just like I look more muscular again too, which is nice. I've filled out a little bit more. And I have also been on an antibiotic for the last week, which has skewed, I believe, skews weight a little bit. I know last week, which see how much better this thing is now. You can
Mm-hmm.
hardly even see it. I had just this like straight up like a golf ball size like cyst on my neck. It was crazy. Anyways, that is really my fat loss update. Anything else there you think I missed before we get into it? The questions?
No, I was just thinking it's so crazy. Like, even after I felt really good for a few days, my strength in the gym for the first couple sessions back after being sick, where like I was pressing 25 pounds, which in my build I was at 40s, and I
Yeah,
was like, it was like,
that's a
so
pretty
it was the
big
weirdest
drop.
sensation. I was like, I just cannot go heavier than this. They won't move. And then the next week I was back to 35. So it's crazy. Like, even after you're feeling good, eating all your food again for multiple days, how big of a difference that makes. And I think both of us, all three of us, since that point, is like, we're so grateful to be in the gym and feeling so good as a contrast.
Yeah. And that's very helpful because again, a lot of my clients, I know y'all are a lot of our clients listen to this. Y'all are going to be experiencing this very soon because I feel like 50% of my people have been sick in the last week
Yeah.
or two. I feel like it took me like the first 2 weeks back because it was like 10 days where I was pretty sick. The first 2 weeks back in the gym, I like wasn't myself. And
Yeah.
again, I think some of it is just more food as well. But then it's like finally like the last week and a half, like, okay, I feel back to normal. Things are really clicking more. So be patient with that also. All right, you ready to get into these questions?
Ready?
All right, I'm gonna send the first one over to you first, and then I'll provide my thoughts after. What do you personally find to be the most difficult aspect of fat loss? How do you work through this?
I honestly haven't felt like it's been difficult. The most difficult
Being better than everybody's your answer. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I don't say that to be like,
I'm just kidding.
oh, this is so easy for me and nobody should find it difficult. The actual like just following through on the things that you need to do has been easy. I get if I had to choose something, I think it is staying out of my head and not trying to rush things and be like, man, I could be spending like I'm spending all this time in fat loss I could be building, and sort of like finding a balance of wanting to do all of the necessary things to get myself ready for when I do go to the next goal, which after this photo shoot is going to be getting ready for a show, and doing all the things that I need to do for that, but then also keeping my mind focused on one thing at a time and
Yeah,
not trying to rush it.
I think that's a really good answer. I think even like with the fat loss phase, just like trusting your coach's guidance and not rushing
Mm-hmm.
it along quicker, for example.
Yeah.
It's kind of what you're saying there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay,
It's
cool.
really easy to be questioning like, man, should I be in fat loss this long? Or what if we stayed closer to leaner and that way I could just spend more time building? But really, like, there's so many different ways of doing things. And there's a reason that I hired my coach and look at the amount of muscle that I've built. So, like, if we had done things differently, I might not have, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a very good insight. From my end, I would really say it's probably, I think it has probably been, I feel like always for me when I'm in fat loss, it is like less like date nights with Katie. Um, because I have a good amount of flexibility when I'm not dieting. Well, like date nights are a big thing for us. And then typically it's just like, not that we can't do it, but it's less. still have like my family was here this last weekend. Like I've still had a couple meals out, but it's like okay, like we went out to like brunch the other day. So I got like, hey, can I get the breakfast burrito, but can you put it in a bowl? Can you like remove the avocado and can you swap the egg for egg whites? Right. So okay, then I have basically just a few ingredients. It's super easy to track. And I've still probably had like throughout this phase, like basically I would say on average like one meal per week like that. Or there's like the mustard salad thing, which I actually haven't done this phase. I've maybe overdid the mustard salads. I wouldn't say it's not similar to you. Like I feel like when you spend enough time away from fat loss, like I have hardly dieted in a good like 2.5 years now,
Hmm.
to where it's not like this, like, oh, fuck, I miss this and this and this, and I hate how I always feel so restricted. I never get to. It's like I'm stoked about this, and I'm stoked for what it's not even really
Hmm.
been something that I think about a whole lot. And just like, hey, instead of us going out, we're cooking at home more. That's been like us like cooking because like the date nights, for example, it's not the food in itself that makes that. It's like us being intentional. Or like I've scheduled like our like dance lessons we do. We've like scheduled those more frequently. Like things like that that aren't so focused around like we're sitting down at a restaurant and eating this meal or like
Hmm.
drinking more alcohol or whatever it may be, but it's still like the time together, the quality time together. And it is really fun to just like cook together at home also, but hey, like I can also track this more accurately. I can like make this better fit my targets. So again, I feel like at the moment and in this phase, that hasn't really been something that's difficult. I would say like the end of my last photo shoot prep, where like in that I just basically if I the only thing I ate out if we would like go out to eat was literally just a mustard salad. And then I think I had a sirloin steak once. Or no, it was a piece of fish. Yeah, I had a piece of grilled fish. But like even with you guys, like, hey, I was in my fat loss phase when y'all were here and we went to Buck and Ryder and just got
Hmm.
like that piece of grilled fish, right, which is very easy to track. Um, I don't know. I feel like it's still pretty manageable these days. It's just
Yeah.
like I feel like it's taking me a long time with like to get over that like, oh, I'm missing out if I don't have like and that I feel like has been my biggest challenge in the past is like that like or one of my biggest challenges is I feel like if like that like if I go out to eat, I have to eat as much as I possibly can, right? And I feel like
Hmm.
I used to just like stuff myself, and it's been cool to like over the years like that's like urge just isn't there as much. I feel like that was kind of just a rambling answer, but anything else you would add there?
Um, I like I said, I've basically been dieting since September. So there was Thanksgiving, Christmas, a vacation, a trip out to see you guys. And yeah, I mean, you definitely it increases the difficulty. I also Nick, my husband, is not like big on eating out, so that's not even something that we really do for date nights at all. We'll go like on a walk or something like that, but um that does make it easier. And I know if
Yeah.
meals out, date nights has been a big part of your routine, that's something that just requires thorough communication with your partner. Yeah.
That's I'm always like talk through with Katie like, hey, I'm gonna be dieting for like this time frame. So like during this, like, hey, how do you want to like are we on the same page with like how I want to approach this? Like what's important to you during this time? Like how can I make sure you still feel loved and valued and we get our quality time, etc. And I do think that is like again with your significant other, I think that's where like resentment comes up. It's not actually like it's like the diet in itself. Like if someone doesn't want you to like I feel like people can like think it's like they have a problem with my diet when it's more so probably like it's taking away from the time that y'all used to like connect, right? So it's like, okay,
Hmm.
can we go get coffee together and like go for a walk? Or like I talked about, like we're doing more of like our dance lessons and things like that, or we're cooking together at home instead. And it's still like very intentional time where it's fun and whatever. But I do think that's really important.
Yeah.
All right. Next up, what helps you the most when it comes to dealing with hunger? Personally, I think the two biggest things for me are one, following a meal plan. It is crazy to me, like thinking about the first photo shoot prep that I did, where I feel like that's like the hungriest I've ever been. I remember it just being like brutal for me. But also, I just did a ton of flexible dieting. Like I would like save a ton of my calories for Hilltop ice cream, which I don't think is really that much. You don't ever hear people talk about Hilltop anymore.
Uh-uh.
Um, but if you don't know what it was basically like a lower calorie ice cream. I think it was like 300 calories per like a pint or quart
Yeah.
or something like about a cup and a half size serving. Um, Whereas honestly, with a meal plan, especially same thing I'm focusing on with clients, like, hey, I'm making sure we're getting lots of satiating foods. We're getting in like a good amount of potatoes or like berries, lean proteins. Hunger is so much more manageable with that structure in place to where honestly there aren't really there have so far there haven't really been that many times where I'm truly hungry. And then the other thing that really helps me is when I think, because I still do often have the thought, I'm hungry. And just taking a second, I talk about it with clients all the time as well, taking a second to actually consider, okay, what does that hunger feel like in my stomach? Like, what's the actual sensation of the hunger like? And so far, almost every time it's been like oh, there's actually like nothing there. I don't actually feel anything. It's again just something else. Like, this is just habitually when I might eat or I'm bored or whatever it may be. What do you got on that? Like, what helps you the most when it comes to dealing with hunger?
Setting up the meal plan for sure is number one. I have my meals structured to where they all have either one of them doesn't actually, but most of them have either fruit or vegetables or both. Um, so plenty of fiber, but not too much because I can definitely skew that way too. um, so that's definitely number one. The staying busy is the
Helps a
biggest
lot.
thing. Like if you have a day where you're just like go 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 all day, you can literally just barely eat, and not that that's the goal, but you don't notice the hunger.
Yeah,
Whereas if you're sitting around all day, you're really noticing it, and you also, for me, it's not even hunger so much, it's just like I want to be eating something right now.
right.
So staying busy, decaf coffee too. I've started just making some
Or
decaf
actual
coffee
coffee.
whenever, yeah, well, I want to be able to sleep. I am having some caffeine in the morning, but later in the day is normally whenever I start to like want more food, and that's when I'll go make some decaf.
Okay, that makes sense. No, that is a really good one. Yeah, really, I mean, from a food selection perspective, like you're again like berries, like
Hmm.
strawberries are a really good option for a lot of volume. We talked about like raspberries recently on this podcast as well, like being a great fiber source. I really like a triple berry blend, like blueberries, blackberries, raspberries. A ton of my clients have that in their meal plans. Potatoes are an excellent option. Oranges are a really good option. A very
Hmm.
satiating option. A little bit higher calorie there relative, but they are still pretty satiating and like a good source of like our vitamin C and whatnot. But that's like on my meal plan. When we switched things up, he changed my meal plan to like on my low days. I have three of my four meals. My first meal is like Greek yogurt, berries, oats, some almond butter, some whey. And then my next three meals are chicken and like shred. I do like chicken in the crock pot, shred it with a fork, and then diced potatoes. I'm eating like so much potatoes in the day. It's like I'm full. I'm like way more full on my low days because it's just such like there's a lot of volume and it's so satiating to the point where there have been like, and I can make swaps. So there's been a couple times where it's like, okay, I'm gonna swap this last meal for rice, this last like serving of potatoes for rice because I'm so full. So it is funny how much like you manipulate your food volume well, which again is something we do with clients that helps tremendously. It just makes such a big difference there. That's where I think dieting is. People think dieting is a lot. Oftentimes, like people's perception of how hard it needs to be, how hungry you need to be, is a lot like off base with reality. Like a big ass salad is another great option here. um, but if we properly manipulate your food selection, hunger can be a lot more manageable. All right, Fancy Angie, is it hard for you to get in 5 weekly cardio sessions?
No, not since I moved it to fasted, because I literally am just replacing some of the time that I would have laid in bed with being on the bike. So the at first making that switch was, I wouldn't say hard, but it was just there was some inertia there because I my routine in the morning was like I usually wake up, but I don't really get up until like closer to 6, just trying to get some extra rest. I'm like wishing I was still sleeping. Um, but now I wake up, take my yohimbine, I lay there for like 15 minutes, and then I go get on the bike. And that's just time that I would have been wasting laying there anyway. It was hard to fit in whenever I wasn't doing fasted because I was doing it later in the afternoon away from my training session. And that's just time that I was wishing I was doing other stuff to get done. Like, I need to be fixing dinner. I need to finish this up so that I can take the boys to whatever they're doing, and that was more difficult. But since I moved it to fasted, it's actually very easy.
Yeah, I would agree. I almost always do mine like first thing in the morning as well. And that's, I mean, I think that's the beautiful thing. Like if you are able to like get like, and honestly, I think that if you like I have a folding treadmill. So I have a folding incline treadmill. It takes up like no room, but I just have it here in my office. I also have a standing desk. Not that you necessarily would like have to do all this, but like if you get like a spin bike on the Facebook Marketplace, there's tons of like cheap folding treadmill options that people don't use for like $100. But which I need to get a new one because mine's so loud. It's terrible. That's the only thing is like my wife and dog aren't sleeping once I start doing my cardio, unfortunately. But basically like part of my morning routine is I do 20 minutes of continuing education. So like I would be sitting here doing this or on my walking pad doing this. Now I just do that while I'm doing my cardio because again my like desk comes up again like put my treadmill on my desk. So I can just like combine it with something like that. And I think that that helps a lot. I just like go an extra
Mm-hmm.
5 minutes instead of 20, I do 25 and that's I don't know, that makes it pretty easy to get in. Um I again think it's like when you're just like trying to find time to squeeze it in, like later in the day, that's where it becomes a lot harder. A lot of times, like I don't think that it makes a big deal at all for clients to pair this with a training session, especially like before like us getting our heart rate up to like 135 beats per minute. The only issue I would have here is like if we're really struggling with the person's training performance already because we're on such low food that we're like depleted and we're burning through more of that here. Okay, that's gonna be less than ideal. But especially if it's like, hey, we're not really that lenient. I honestly don't have a problem with someone, hey, you can just like do this as a warm up for your training session, right? Especially if it's an upper body day. Um, if it that makes it ultimately easier for us to get it in, I don't really have an issue with that either.
Yeah.
I
I
think
mean,
cardio is
if you're
really,
pairing the two together, though, I think you might as well just do it after.
yeah, or you could do it after. I don't have a problem there either way. Is basically the point that I'm making.
Yeah.
Um, But I think with cardio is really just like the mindset. It's just it can be easy to just like, oh, this sucks. Like I have to do cardio, yada yada yada, and just I mean, just I basically the first couple times I did, I was like, oh my god, I forgot how hard this is, and then like after it's like, okay, I'm choosing to do this. I can choose like for this to be fun, a fun challenge for me, or I can choose to complain about this. And then honestly, it's been like fine since. I feel like once I got into the routine of it, it hasn't been a problem at all.
Yeah. My first 5 minutes are always like, ugh, this sucks. And then after the first 5 minutes, my heart rate's up and I can finally just, I don't have to like push quite as hard to keep it there.
Those first couple of minutes where you're getting your heart rate up are always where you're like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I have to speed it up more, and then it's fine after that.
Yeah.
Um, how has practicing being outside of a fat loss phase helped you with this one? I think I kind of spoke to that where in the with the answer to the first question, where personally at least I feel like it's just I want to diet, I
Hmm.
want, and it's not like oh my gosh, like I miss all these foods and all these things that I haven't had this for so long. I resent this. It's just, and I think that's part of the beauty of spending so long away from it is like, if you can really be chomping at the bit to diet, you're excited for it. It just makes it so much easier. And we've talked through, of course, like we build more muscle metabolically, like we're going to be in a better place. Body will be more responsive to fat loss. But honestly, I think like just as much as all that, that's just like mentally, it's so much easier by taking a good amount of time away from a diet. How about,
When
are
you
you,
do that too, it's like, okay, this is my diet phase. And
Hmm.
whether it's a fast 8 week one like what you're doing or a longer one like what I'm doing, we know it's not going to be forever. We know
Right.
we're going to be able to go back to a little more flexibility and more food and not feeling hungry. But if you've only ever dieted, it's like, well, I might as well indulge this one time because this is going to be forever. So I might as well do this because I've got
Right.
to spend the whole rest of my life restricting this way.
Which is just a terrible way to live your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Anything else you would add there, like as far as you,
Oh, me specifically? Um,
just like how practicing being outside of this phase has helped you?
I think a lot of it is what I just said, where I know that I'm going back to eating more food. And so staying focused during this time is like, okay, I have this relatively short amount of time. Let's make the most of it, get the work done, and get back to it because it's so easy. And I'm not going to say that I never have these sort of thoughts or feelings. It's super normal, but in a build phase it's really easy to be like, man, I wish being lean, and then fat loss phase being like, man, I wish eating more food and not being hungry. But then it's like, okay, well, now you're not enjoying either one of them. And so going through the build phase and experiencing the plus sides that come with that and feeling so good in training, you can appreciate that. And then getting into a fat loss phase, you appreciate like the structure that comes with it and like the discipline, and you just feel really locked in and you can appreciate those sort of things with it.
Yeah, I think it's if you approach it from the right place, it's just enjoyable. It's not like, oh man, I wish I didn't have to do this. All right. Um, I can. Do you need me to take this one first? I'll assume. You good? Okay.
No, I'm good. He just
Cool.
woofed one time. I thought it was gonna turn into more.
Andrea's dogs are energetic today.
One of them is so vocal.
Um, is there a certain mindset you've approached this phase with?
We kind of touched on some of it in the last question a bit, but just stay locked in. Appreciate the fat loss phase for the things that you get from it, and stay focused. Try not to let your mind wander too much to, oh my gosh, I could be spending this time building muscle.
Yeah, I always tell myself don't be a bitch. Um, no, but I mean in reality, I before I start like any phase like this, I like to like take it. I would like to set my intentions for it, and I love to journal, so I'll like journal about okay, how do I want to show up to this phase? Like how am I going to operate during this phase? Why is it important to me? What's like the like why does that matter? Basically, like what are my daily actions going to look like during this? I think it's I don't know. I feel for me personally, that helps so much in almost any situation. Like going into like let's say I am dieting and it's a night out, or I'm not dieting and it's a night like out with friends or whatever it may be, like thinking through ahead of time and just setting my intentions as far as how do I want to handle this 24 hours from now? What will have me feeling good about how I manage things versus like what might I want to do in the moment, but ultimately makes me feel like shit. Now, sometimes that doesn't always mean it's like, well, I just like ate a plain chicken breast. Sometimes it is. There are times where it's been like, maybe I'm not such a tight ass and maybe I do like drink, like I have like two or three drinks instead of one or whatever it might be. Um, you know what I mean? But it's setting intentions either way. And same thing here. Then, as you said, like just I feel like every like so much of like your whole life you can choose like your perception of things. You can choose whether this is fun or this sucks, right? And it's I don't know. I like analyze my feelings all the time, and I feel like when it's like, oh, I don't feel like doing this, like I'm in a bad mood today, like why does today suck? Then just reminding myself that like your actions dictate how you feel. It's kind of like how you feel is a lag metric, I think, largely of just like how you've been acting. So it's like you let that be the thing that's like, oh, well, I'm not gonna follow through on this. It's just gonna get worse, right? It's normally like, okay, well, maybe I need to get my shit together. That's kind of different, just a side tangent. But it's really like as we said, just a I'm choosing to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm gonna do it, I want to do it well. I want to get the best result out of it I can. I want to look back on this and just be proud of how well I executed. I want to be able to say that I nailed things, that I don't like regret, like, oh, I missed this or so on and so forth. And it does just, it feels really good. I feel like a lot of people get like very frustrated and like upset with themselves because they like never follow through on their commitments to themselves. And even if you don't want to do it in the moment, like things like the cardio, as soon as you're done with it, you just feel like so much better. You feel so much more proud of yourself. And like if you can like string together days, weeks, months, years of doing those things, it just does so much for your confidence. So I don't know. I feel like at this point it's just like rewarding and it's fun to
Hmm.
where it's a lot easier to like do all those things, but especially like my first few photo shoots, I feel like I had to be a lot more. This didn't come nearly as naturally.
Yeah, I feel like newer, less experienced dieters, I guess you could say, almost try to see how much they can get away with and kind of push that boundary while still making some progress. Whereas at some point, most people, you'll see them kind of flip that switch toward like, okay, I want to make sure at the end of the day I've said that I've followed through on everything to the best of my ability.
Yeah. And there's no right or wrong, but it's like for if you're a lean
Meh.
person trying to get leaner, if you want fat loss, if the goal is losing fat at X rate, there is a right or wrong, yes. But if you want the result, there's a right or
Yeah,
wrong.
it's just kind of the journey that people tend to go through with it. It
Yeah.
seems like.
Yeah. Okay. Um, how do you decide how long to stay in fat loss? Really just, I mean, personally, until you get the job done.
Yeah, how much fat do you have to lose?
It's really just how lean do I want to be? How long do I project it'll take to get there? If I'm done sooner, cool. If I'm not there yet, I'll keep pushing. There are, now, is this the approach like we take with every client? No. Someone might start with us and like, hey, my long-term goal is a physique that's, which I would say like, yes, my long-term goal is still a physique that's drastically different than where I'm at. But like for this fat loss phase, I want to get pretty ripped, but I don't want to get past like I don't want to get lean to the point where I have to gain back body fat in order to productively build. So within that, after this trip, I'm gonna kind of reassess, hey, what makes sense as the goal from here. But I imagine I'll probably be relatively close to that point by then, and it's probably gonna make sense for us to build. But for a client, it might be, hey, like your long-term goal is to get leaner and build a lot more muscle. We are seeing like we've been dieting, we've lost a good amount of fat. We're seeing now like maybe biofeedback is starting to suffer. You feel a lot better, you're a lot leaner. Are we ultimately as lean as we want to be long term? No. But let's have a conversation about this. Hey, does it make sense for us to take some time away from dieting? Maybe we're going to spend the next 6 months focusing on making lean gains and then transition back to a fat loss phase. We'll have more muscle. Building more muscle is a huge part of your goal as well. Like we need to make that a bigger priority, or like things come up with life sometimes where, hey, maybe it makes sense for us to switch directions. I would say less and less, like as we do work with a lot more advanced client now, that's honestly like even that doesn't come up all that often, or like I haven't had any instances where it's like I can't diet because of X like this life stress, or I feel like a lot of like most stressful times I've actually been dieting, and it kind of helps that like you're super busy during that time. Um, but yeah, personally, it's really just like until we get the job done. If it was like an instance where, and again, I feel like this comes up less and less because we're very good at screening. Like, hey, is this person in a responsive place for fat loss before we push you into fat loss? Whereas I think it like when I used to coach people, just like, hey, you want fat loss? Cool. Week one, we're starting fat loss. Then there were a lot more instances where it's like, well, shit, now we're X amount of time in, this person's not responding. Okay, do we
Hmm.
need to pull them out and like go in an entirely different direction? But that isn't something that happens all that frequently these days because we're much more knowledgeable, much better at being able to like screen those things. So I don't know. What would you say there? Anything else to add?
I think for somebody with a goal, like a kind of like a deadline goal, similar to what you and I are both doing, it's sort of like, okay, how much body fat do we have to lose? let's aim for well, usually 0.5 to 1% ish per week rate of loss, unless it's like a mini cut, similar to yours. Then add about 4 weeks extra for cushion. And then as you get closer, like from that starting point, as you get closer, you can kind of realign. Like you have a broader target. This is kind of the time frame that you're aiming for, and as you get closer and closer, that gets more and more narrowed and dialed in as you know exactly where you're at.
It's a much better way to answer that question than I did. Okay. I think I better understand what they're asking now. Yeah. So if I was looking at a client, basically what I look at is how much weight do I estimate they need to lose to get to this point? And I'll typically be looking at, depending on where they're at, like let's say what's a super realistic amount of weight I think they can lose. So let's say it's like
Per week.
0.75 pounds per week, a pound a
Yeah.
week, somewhere around that range is for someone who's like, let's say 150 pounds or more. That's super realistic. If we're getting below that, maybe even closer to like a half or 0.75 pounds per week, maybe like more like 0.75. Okay, how many weeks do I estimate it would take to get to the goal? I'm going to tack on like an extra 4 weeks at least on top of that to make sure we have plenty of cushion. If we get done early, cool. And that's kind of how we start by estimating that. And then we will refine it more based on, hey, how quickly are we progressing? How's your body responding in this phase once we get into it?
Yeah.
All right, I heard Jeremiah talk about posing. Is he competing? Potentially. Natalie and I talked about that on the last episode that
Mm-hmm.
came out, so I would definitely check that out. Decided not this year, but probably. I don't have a time frame for that yet. Honestly, I think I need to get a lot more jacked still, but it is definitely something that I do plan to do. Anything
Yeah, I
else to add
think
there?
I mean, you and I are both starting posing pretty far out because we need to, so we really need some work on making it look more natural.
I feel like you're probably a lot better at it than I am. I am not gifted at anything like that. I am not a gifted like mover. You're super athletic, and I am not.
I feel like
Um,
athletic doesn't help whatsoever in posing. You need to be more like flowy, and I just am
oh,
not.
dude, I'm not flowy at all. No. For our dance, our like dance that we're practicing right now, there's this thing we have to like float you like,
Uh-huh.
and I'm flow your arm around, and I'm so bad at it.
It makes me think of like Arnold in Pumping Iron doing the ballet to
That's
improve his
what
posing.
Brandon DeCruz shot me a message for. He posted that video of Katie and I dancing, and that's what he said too.
Yeah. So that's
Which
why
I'm.
you're talking about it this early is getting started early.
Did you keep an intro workout? On one hand, it's sacrificing satiety and volume. On the other hand, it's preserving training performance. Have you kept your intro workout in?
I took mine out maybe like three weeks ago or so. So yeah, now all I do intro workout is EAAs and some flavoring to go along with it because they're super bitter when they're not when they're not flavored. And that's it. So no more Gatorade. At some point, it's it does help with performance, and you can argue that that's even more important in a fat loss phase. But at some point, if your food gets low enough, you would rather just chew that food. And your pre workout meal, if you have really well structured pre and post workout meals, you're still gonna perform just fine in your training.
Yeah. I don't think the intro is gonna make or break by any means. For the first 4 weeks, I mean, my intro was, so I was doing like 30 grams of carbs in my intro workout drink before, and I pulled it back to, it was just coconut water for hydration and EAAs. So I did still keep EAAs. I think like, regardless, like if you don't mind spending the money on EAAs, they're only going to be like a net positive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but now, especially that I have more food and the coach I'm working with really training performance being a huge priority here. Like we want to maintain training performance basically at all costs. Um, I have, what do I have intra workout? I think I have 20 grams of carbs intra workout. Let me look here. Yeah, so now I have 20 grams of carbs from Carbolin, basically very similar to highly branched cyclic dextrin. And I have 15 grams of EAs intra workout. So I have actually added that back in. But I think that Like ultimately, if a client is really struggling with hunger, I'll almost always pull like the intra workout carbs.
Hmm.
And even like, hey, if I'm gonna put it like, even if it's like, hey, I'm gonna give you some more fruit pre-workout, like more berries, I think that it's typically worth the trade-off if someone's really hungry, struggling with hunger. But it's like as we said, like hunger hasn't really been an issue for either of us, it doesn't seem, so makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely still get hungry, but um what my coach had wanted to, when she pulled that out, she wanted to kind of spread my carbs a little bit more evenly through the day, whereas they were pretty weighted around my training session, just to help kind of mitigate stress on the body as we were pushing kind of starting to push harder.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
How important is the breakdown of fat and carbs when in fat loss? Some say let them fall where they may and focus on protein intake first and foremost. What are your thoughts on being close to exact on fats and carbs also? This is also one of my clients, so Melissa, you are going to learn. Um, of course, protein and overall calorie intake are going to be for fat loss are most important things, but I think that the breakdown of carbs and fats is very important. The more advanced the person is getting to be, which is going to be all of our clients, definitely the question asker here. And I think it's like there's a lot of like content out there that's more geared towards that person who's like, man, I just want to lose like 30 pounds and I've never been able to lose it. Kind of like the classic yo-yo dieter where like fat diets are the only thing that's worked for me. Not like a more advanced individual who is relative to the general population more advanced, who is like, I want to be exceptionally jacked and exceptionally lean relative to like the average person at least. This becomes a lot more important. Our carbs are, and the amount of carbs we have taken in, when we're looking at our ability to train hard, our ability to build, or at very least maintain muscle, our carbs are a huge part of that. And when we're looking at like the way we're training, where there needs to be like synergy between the amount of carbohydrates we have coming in and our training intensity, our training volume, especially because so many clients who work with us, where we can still achieve like a pretty good body recomposition effect, like during fat loss typically, if we have you fueled well. And we do want to, as much as possible, support your training performance when it comes to, again, like in most cases, like building muscle. Like Melissa's a really good example of someone who's more advanced. She's a coach herself, but also I for sure think she's gonna be able to see a solid recomp even in some fat loss. Um, but we need to make sure that we're putting training performance as something that's at the forefront. Now, if we were to just like go like way higher in fat, lower carb, the training performance wouldn't be there. It's like hypertrophy training is largely a glycolytic process. It's primarily going to be fueled by carbs, so that's important. And then also, a lot of your carb sources, like fats, aren't per calorie. Fats typically aren't going to be as satiating, right? So a lot of our fat sources, like it's just so easy if we're over consuming fats. Now, there's fats are still needed. It's going to be like an important part of us getting our essential fatty acids, like getting an adequate amount of our omega 3s, getting some omega 6s to a degree, um, even like supporting hormone production, hormone function to a degree. So we don't want to completely remove fat. But if it's like, hey, we're way higher in our fat intake, way lower in our carb intake, we're typically going to be a lot less full, right? If it's like I'm eating like a ton of nuts and nut butters and olive oil, that's not going to be nearly as satiating as if I could eat like a lot of potatoes and berries and things of that nature. So the breakdown is important. I typically skew towards higher carb intake. This is probably a topic for a different episode, but then it's like, unless like on someone's low days, then there are times where like, hey, I purposely want to really get this person very glycogen depleted. And there will be maybe a couple days a week where I'm really pulling that person's carbs way back. And maybe fat intake is actually coming up a little bit, but I really want to again get them depleted. Um, what are your thoughts on being close to exact on fats and carbs? Also, for someone who's more advanced, I think it's important, and that's what I would expect you to be. Um, you have anything else to add there?
I think you said all that really well and covered all of it really well. I had somebody just this week we're going into a fat loss phase, and I added dig days where we are depleting glycogen. And she said on those days, if I'm hitting my carbs or if I'm hitting my calories and protein, can I go a little over with carbs and sacrifice some fats? And I'm like, actually, no. The purpose of these days is to deplete your glycogen. So there are some very specific cases where we want the macros where they're at for a reason to create the physique that we're looking for. And I think that the the people who are talking about like all that matters is calories and protein aren't wrong, but they're just speaking to a different level of goal.
Yeah.
So it's just something that doesn't apply here.
Like the I'm not speaking too many generalities, but that person's like goal physique might be where you are already, like
Yeah.
speaking to like our clients, not where you want to be. And that's a perfect example, as you said, like on those date days, we're really trying to, we want to take it past the point where your body is burning through glycogen, through carbs as fuel, and it's actually forced to start oxidizing more fat as fuel, and ideally that's actually body fat, which is why we're taking those day days so low. And we're getting to the point where we're doing things like that. If it's like, well, I'm actually going to cut my fat in half and bring my carbs up by like 100 grams, okay, suddenly we're not getting that. We're less likely to get the outcome we want. Now, ultimately, like the calorie deficit is the most important thing, but again, as we
Mm-hmm.
get more advanced, it also gets more nuanced. I think this really ties well into the next question. Um, Andrea, during a fat loss phase, is the fat macro in food significantly lower to continue losing fat? I think
So
they're
at the
asking if like you need to cut out fat to lose fat.
Yeah, no, you don't have to cut out fat to lose fat, but um usually at the beginning, if you're coming out of a build phase, fat will be reduced. And again, remember we're talking to somebody with high level physique goals that want to build as much muscle as possible and are already coming from a lean place, getting leaner. We usually will reduce the fats to create more of a calorie deficit because we want to spare carbs in that instance, so that we're making sure to keep training performance in the best place possible. So when you're coming out of a build and your fats are most likely already high, that's a good place to pull from. Um, as you get closer and closer to usually, so how it usually ends up going is you pull fats down at first, and then you're pulling from carbs for a while to create a larger deficit, and then towards the end you're pulling fats again to create a larger deficit. That's kind of how it tends to end up going if we're looking in like generalities.
Yeah, I fully agree with all that. Where it's again not like ultimately the calorie deficit, you're eating fewer calories than you're burning is the most important thing. That's why you can absolutely still lose body fat on keto, for example. And a
But
lot
you're
of people
not going to
have.
train very well.
Right, it's gonna be far from ideal from like a body composition perspective for most people, but it's not. Again, like it's if we're eating more fat, our body is going to be using more fat for fuel. Now, your body burning fat for fuel isn't the same thing as it burning body fat for fuel, right? Think of it as like triglycerides, or think of it as like fat in the bloodstream. Basically, we're using for fuel first, and then okay, we will burn through that. Now we have to actually tap into like our fat cells and like use that for fuel. If we're eating more carbs, it'll just use more carbs for fuel. But no, it's like ultimately yes, the calorie deficit is the most important. I know we just talked through like the like glycogen depletion thing, etc. So there still are a lot of nuances there, but yeah, it's basically as you said. Like typically, I don't think it makes sense for a lot of people to have like an extremely high fat intake. It
Mm-mm.
is a little bit more likely to be stored as fat. It's easier for your body to basically store it as fat than carbs. Might be splitting hairs to a degree, but yeah, typically like we typically do pull it down a bit post building phase and over time, especially if we're really digging to get lean. People do typically have to go like quite a bit lower in fat than they're used to or want to, just part of the process. But also have to go lower in carbs than we're used to or want to. Typically,
Yeah.
it's just again part of getting super lean. All right, last two questions here. I think these would actually be really good individual episodes, so we're gonna save those. Any kind of final thoughts from you, Andrea, as we wrap this up?
No, I hope this was helpful. If anybody has more questions or like follow-ups on these where they want to continue the conversation, shoot us a message and let us know.
Absolutely. All right. Again, I hope this was helpful. Now, one huge request I have for all of y'all. If you have taken value from the show, we have a podcast survey linked up in the show notes. We would love your feedback. This is also a place where if it's like, hey, I wish you guys would talk about this episode more. I wish Jeremiah was just never on the show again. Whatever it would be, like things you want us to talk about more, any feedback you have for us on the podcast, etc. There is a survey linked up. It would mean the world to us. We really just want to improve this as much as possible for y'all, help it better serve you. So like topics, we'll cover things like topics you want us to discuss, etc. Do us a huge favor, fill that out for us. It would be tremendously appreciated. Past that, if you would like to apply for coaching with our team, link is in the show notes as well. If you enjoy the show, leave us a 5-star rating or review, and we will catch you guys next time.